Hi guys, in this video I'm going to do a full exam review with May 24 IB Economics SL papers. If you have a particular paper that you want to revise, do check the description box and find the timestamp for one. Alright then, let's give it a go. Alright, question number 1. The two questions are from the Unit 2 Microeconomics. And it's safe to start your introduction with defining a few key terms mentioned in the prompt, such as substitutes and change in demand. And in body 1, you can mainly focus on analyzing the impact on substitutes when there is a decrease in the price of traveling by train. First, from the demand side, when the price of train travel decreases, demand for substitute, such as bus, car, or airline travel, is likely to decrease. This is because consumers will be more inclined to choose the cheaper alternative, which is train travel. Therefore, it's going to decrease the demand for buses or car rentals, etc. Therefore, the price of these substitutes would decrease. Also, from the supply side, as the demand for substitutes decreases, firms offering these alternatives might reduce their production of or service offerings. This could result in a decrease in the output of bus companies or car rental agencies, since fewer people are using those services. Therefore, the quantities available would decrease. To illustrate such, this is the train and this is the substitute market. Demand decreases, supply decreases. Next is about its impact on complements. Again, from the demand side, when there is a decrease in the price of train travel, it might increase the demand for complements because more people might choose to travel by train now that it's cheaper. For example, if more people are traveling by train, there could be increased demand for services like parking at train stations, food sales in train stations, or luggage handling, etc. So those prices are going to get higher. And from the supply side, with the increased demand for train travel, businesses that provide complementary services may experience an increase in demand, prompting them to increase output to meet the higher number of travelers. Therefore, quantity available would be higher. So you can also illustrate the situation with the diagram. Demand increases, supply increases. Moving on to the next question. B, using real-world examples, evaluate the view that the government should never provide subsidies to firms. Next question again, the intro can be smoothly started with definitions of terms like the forms of government intervention, subsidies, and merit goods. First, the essay can have one main discussion point that is mainly agreeing to the view, which means talking about the concept of subsidy provision. So first, subsidies can distort market competition, favoring certain firms or sectors over others and preventing the market from efficiently allocating resources. Also, subsidies may be misused by firms that do not genuinely need support. And firms that are heavily subsidized may become dependent on government support, losing its competitiveness, etc. And subsidy programs can be subject to political manipulation or corruption. To illustrate such, one example I would use is about the Middle Eastern nations like Saudi Arabia or Qatar, which provide vast subsidies for oil and gas production. Such provision definitely helps keep fuel prices low domestically. However, this can have negative environmental consequences and promote overconsumption of fossil fuels. Next is about the disagreement to the view. It should be about the pros of subsidy provision. First, subsidies can incentivize companies to invest in new technologies, products, or processes. For example, renewable energy firms often receive government subsidies to encourage innovation in clean energy. And government support can help firms expand, which often leads to the creation of more jobs, particularly in strategic sectors like manufacturing, technology, or renewable energy. Also, subsidies can act as a safety net for industries during certain periods like economic downturn, etc. Therefore, it can prevent layoffs or bankrupt, etc. And governments may subsidize firms in industries like pretty critical to national security, such as defense, energy, or food production, to ensure they remain competitive and capable of supporting national interest. As a real-world example, this can work. Germany's renewable energy subsidies have fostered job creation in the renewable energy sector with an estimated 300,000 jobs created in this industry. All right, question 1 done. Let me move on to the next question. Question number 2. These are from the Unit 3, Macroeconomics. Question A. Explain the difference between cyclical unemployment and structural unemployment. First, defining given terms such as cyclical and structural unemployment would be good enough to fill out the introduction. In Body 1, you can focus on analyzing the key features of cyclical unemployment. First, cyclical unemployment occurs due to fluctuations in the business cycle. It is directly linked to changes in aggregate demand in the economy. And when there is a recession or an economic downturn, the overall demand for goods and services in the economy falls. This results in firms cutting back on production, leading to a reduction in the demand for labor, and consequently an increase in unemployment. Conversely, cyclical unemployment decreases during periods of economic growth, when demand for goods and services rises, encouraging firms to hire more workers. For your information, you can think of the COVID-19 pandemic time when there was huge unemployment, So this is the diagram you can use. Next, in Body 2, you can talk about the key features of structural unemployment. This arises from a mismatch between the skills and qualifications of the unemployed workers and the requirements of the jobs available. It occurs due to long-term changes in the economy, often driven by technological advancement, changes in consumer preferences, globalization, or shifts in industrial structure. Unlike cyclical unemployment, which is related to the economic cycle, structural unemployment is usually persistent and long-lasting, as it results from deep changes in the economy that require workers to acquire new skills or relocate to different industries. Geographical reasons too. So it requires retraining or relocation. Workers who experience structural unemployment often need to retrain themselves or move to areas where job opportunities are available in growing industries. So again, one additional information as an example would be the case of the artificial intelligence, So nowadays, there is humongous rise of automation and artificial intelligence in the manufacturing sector. So it has made many routine jobs obsolete. Therefore, workers in these industries need to retrain or relocate. Moving on, B, using real-world examples, evaluate the view that fiscal policy is the most effective way of reducing a country's level of unemployment. As you can expect, you define unemployment and fiscal policy to start the essay. And first, in Body 1, the discussion can present a few ideas that agree with the view. So it should be about the pros of the fiscal policy. First, expansionary fiscal policy, such as increasing government spending, can directly create jobs, especially in sectors like construction, healthcare, education, or infrastructure. This is especially true for projects that require manual labor or specialized skills. Also, when the government spends money, it not only creates jobs directly, but also stimulates demand for other goods and services. For example, construction workers hired for public projects will spend their wages on consumer goods, leading to more jobs in other sectors. This ripple effect can help reduce unemployment even further. Also, fiscal policy can be tailored to specific target sector that can further be boosted in the long term. Real-world example can be the one from America. So-called American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This one involved significant government expenditure totaling approximately this much money. The spending was directed towards infrastructure projects, energy efficiency programs, healthcare, education, and direct aid to individuals during the pandemic period. Next, the discussion can go further to talk about the disagreement to the view, which is about the cons of the policy. So expanding government spending or cutting taxes to lower unemployment can lead to larger budget deficits and an increase in national debt. So if not managed properly, this could result in long-term economic challenges, such as higher interest rates or inflation. And if fiscal policy is used aggressively to stimulate the economy during periods of full employment or near full capacity, it can lead to unnecessary inflation. And increased government borrowing to finance fiscal stimulus can lead to higher interest rates, which is called the crowding out effect. And while fiscal stimulus can reduce short-term unemployment, it might not solve long-term structural unemployment, especially if it's caused by factors like automation, outsourcing, or shifts in consumer preferences or things like that. So if not paired with structural reforms, it could lead to a boom and bust cycle, not fundamentally solving the employment problem. So in this case, UK's COVID-19 follow scheme would be a good one to illustrate. In response to the pandemic, the government introduced the coronavirus job retention scheme, commonly known as the follow scheme, which paid 80% of wages for employees who were unable to work due to lockdowns. However, the scheme helped protect jobs and reduce unemployment from a projected peak, though it was criticized for keeping zombie companies afloat. So unemployment in the UK peaked around like 5% in 2020, which was lower than initially feared. However, like it caused some unintended problems, like zombie companies. Moving on, the last questions are from the Unit 4, Global Economy. Explain how capital flight and low levels of investment in human capital can act as barriers to economic growth. Defining capital flight, human capital, and economic growth would be enough for the introduction. First, in body 1, you can focus on explaining how capital flight acts as a barrier to economic growth. First, capital flight leads to a decrease in the amount of capital available for the investment within the country. So when businesses and investors move their money elsewhere, they stop investing in domestic infrastructure, industries, and enterprises. Therefore, this can lead to a shortage of funds for business expansion, job creation, and technological innovation. Also, when significant capital is withdrawn from an economy, it can lead to a sharp depreciation of the national currency. This makes imports more expensive, leading to higher inflation and further decreasing domestic purchasing power. A weakened currency also discourages foreign investment, as investors are wary of exchange rate risk. And capital flight can signal a lack of confidence in the domestic economy. Lastly, with a high level of capital flight, banks and financial institutions may face liquidity issues. As domestic savings decrease, they are less able to lend to businesses and individuals. Such can be illustrated with an AD-AS diagram showing AD shift to the left, or PPC diagram showing its leftward shift. Next is about how low levels of investment in human capital act as a barrier to economic growth. On top of that, a poorly educated or underskilled workforce is less capable of adopting new technologies, increasing productivity, or innovating. Without investment in education and training, workers are less efficient, which directly lowers overall economic output. Obviously, investment in human capital is essential for technological advancements and innovations. Countries with low levels of education and training tend to have a less dynamic entrepreneurial culture and fewer people capable of driving technological progress. Also, if investments in human capital are not equally distributed across different segments of society, it can lead to higher income inequality and social divisions. Therefore, it can definitely worsen overall economic mobility and inhibit a large proportion of population from contributing economic growth. This time, probably property cycle or long-run aggregate supply curve shifting to the left would work. Next, question B. Using real-world examples, evaluate the view that the level of real GDP is the best measure of economic development. You can start your introduction with the definitions of GDP, real GDP, and economic development. First, in body one, the discussion can present a few ideas that agree with the view. It should be about the pros of using GDP to measure economic development. As GDP, as real GDP as a universal measure, it is widely recognized by governments, policymakers, and international organizations like the World Bank and IMF, which means this measure allows for easy comparison of economic performance between countries or regions. Also, GDP measure provides a snapshot of a country's total economic output, showing how much value the economy is generating. So it typically associated with a growing economy, suggesting increasing productivity, industrial output, etc. And it is a useful tool for government and central banks to design economic policies. So while GDP doesn't directly measure well-being, nonetheless, higher GDP is often correlated with better standards of living, including higher incomes, better infrastructure, and access to healthcare and education. Lastly, GDP growth is an important indicator for assessing whether an economy is expanding or contracting. So this can signal economic health and encourages investment and business activity. China's case would be a good one to illustrate the case. The country's GDP growth has been a major indicator of its rise as a global economic power, jumping up as the second highest. I mean, even though recently it's been struggling a little bit, but still, So the country's GDP expanded by over 10% annually for several decades, which has been linked to rising incomes, a growing middle class, and improved infrastructure. Next, the discussion can go further to talk about the disagreement to the view. It should be about the cons of using GDP to measure economic development. First, GDP measures total economic output, but does not account for how wealth is distributed among population. It can mask inequality within a country where economic growth benefits only a small population. And since GDP only includes market transactions, meaning it excludes valuable activities that contribute to well-being but don't involve monetary exchanges, such as household labor or volunteering. Also, GDP does not factor in environmental costs or the depletion of natural resources. So if there is a country that could experience strong GDP growth at the cost of significant environmental damage, which may harm long-term economic prospects, but GDP doesn't know how to reflect that. So in this case, Brazil would be a good one. So the country's rapid economic growth can be largely driven by the deforestation of the Amazon, which would increase GDP, but in the long term, environmental degradation could reduce the country's future development potential, and yet GDP would not reflect this case. All right, this is the end of the paper 1 review. Following is paper 2. Question 1 is about the country UK, and we've got multiple text and data to understand its economic state. Question A1. Define the term recession indicated bold in the text. The term refers to a negative or for at least 2 consecutive quarters of real GDP falls in a country's economy. Question 2. Define the term portfolio investment indicated in bold in the text. It refers to the buying of financial assets, such as shares and bond savings, to gain a capital gain or interest, and such transaction is recorded in the financial account of the balance of payment in a country. Question B. A pharmaceutical good is priced at £5 per unit and the exported quantity is 1,000 units. The price decreases to £4. Using the price elasticity of demand figure for pharmaceuticals exported from the UK, calculate the revenue earned in the UK pound after the price change. The question asks us to calculate the PED with the given information. First, if you scroll up to text A, paragraph 6, it identifies the PED of the product, which is -6. And from the information above, we can calculate the percentage change of the prices from 5 to 4, which is -20%. Then we now can get the value of the percentage change of the quantities, which is 12%. What we should calculate is the after quantity due to the price change. Then we can get the value of revenues by doing this. So the answer is this one. Using information from Table 2, calculate the balance of trading goods for the UK in 2021. Table 2, we can check the data for the current account balance, including goods, services, income, and current transfers. So the year 2021, we know the sum of all as -60, as the question said. So we can simply get the value that we want, is -156. Using an ADAS diagram, explain the likely effect on the UK's real GDP of higher interest rates. According to the text, it says the BOE raised the interest rate, which is a type of contractionary monetary policy. And it will increase the cost of borrowing and increases the return to saving. So it will lead to less consumption investment and therefore reduces AD, which decreases real GDP, as you can check from the diagram. D. Using an exchange rate diagram, explain the likely effect on the exchange rate for the pound of increased international demand for green goods produced in the UK. The given text says that there is an increased foreign demand on UK green goods, and it means that UK's exports are increasing along with the demand for the pound, since foreigners purchase the UK product with British currency. This would lead to a rise in the exchange rate and currency appreciation as illustrated in the diagram. E. Using an international trade diagram, explain how imports of agricultural goods to the UK are likely to change as a result of the free trade agreement with Australia and New Zealand. As mentioned in the text, the FTA deals with Australia and New Zealand would lower tariffs on agricultural goods, and it will lower their price, making imports cheaper, thus reducing the level of domestic supply and increasing the quantity demanded, causing an increase in imported quantities as much as the size of the Q1 and Q4, as you can find from the diagram. F. Using an externalities diagram, explain why the output of fossil fuels moves closer to the social optimum when subsidies are provided for the production of solar panels. As a result of the subsidy granted to solar panel producers, it can result in the fossil fuel market to consume closer to the socially optimal level. The reason is because fossil fuels demand, which is an alternative source of solar panel energy, is likely to decrease due to the cheaper price of the solar energy that is subsidized. And ultimately, it will move the fossil fuel market output towards the socially optimal level output, which is lower than the free market output level, as you can check from the diagram. G. Using information from the text, data, and your knowledge of economics, discuss the likely effects of the exchange rate trend from 2011 to 2022 on the UK balance of payments and the UK economy. For this essay, one easy way to start introduction is to put some general introduction of the country's economic data or issue. And along with that, you can write down some definitions of key terms such as depreciation and exchange rate. Lastly, for this question specific, you can identify the country's overall currency trend, which keeps downwarding, recording depreciation. First, the discussion can focus on the positive effects of depreciation for the UK economy. As you can find evidence from the given text and data, depreciation has probably attracted inward FDI due to the improved competitiveness of exports. Also, depreciation may also result in increased inflows of portfolio investment since the UK stocks and bonds become cheaper. So this would provide some funds for UK investment, increasing output. Thirdly, depreciation of the exchange rate makes export prices lower in foreign currency terms. Therefore, it would contribute to increased AD and consequently GDP. Lastly, depreciation could help increase the UK exports of green goods, contributing to the success of the net zero strategy. Moving on to the next discussion point, it is about the negative effects of depreciation. You can say that unlike the theoretical expectation, the country seems to be out of the expected trend. So even if the currency is consistently depreciated, the trade deficit, according to the table 2, the deficits have widened. And consistent depreciation may deplete the foreign reserves of the country, which are currently already low. Also, the UK's market share for many exports is falling, indicating that trade has grown more rapidly in other countries. Also, what is noticeable is that depreciation may do little to improve employment and economic growth. So perhaps changes in the income of trading partners and quality of exports would have a more significant impact on growth and unemployment. And depreciation will increase import prices, which will add to inflationary pressure in the economy. All above can be used to discuss the pros and cons of persistent depreciation. And the conclusion is not necessary, but if you have time, do write a few words to summarize your discussion. Question 2 is about the country, the Philippines. And just like the first question, we've got referable text and data to understand its economic state. Define the term remittances indicated in bold in the text. It refers to the transfer of money, specifically incomes by foreign workers sent back to their home country. Next, define the term expansionary fiscal policy indicated in bold in the text. Expansionary fiscal policy refers to a type of government policy done via increase in government expenditure or decrease in taxation to boost aggregate demand of a country. Question B1. Using information from Table 5, calculate the value of import of goods and services into the Philippines in 2022. It asks us to calculate the unknown value, which is again pretty simple, since we know the GDP and the rest of the data that is needed to get the GDP except the value of import. So we can get the value in this way. Pretty simple. B2. Using information from Table 5, calculate the value of net income from abroad in the Philippines in 2022. Since GNI is calculated by summing up GDP and net income from abroad, in this case, we know GDP and GNI, so this should be the answer. A middle-income household in the Philippines earned 4,000 Philippines peso in 2021. Its weekly income increased to 4,200 in 2022. Its weekly demand for rice decreased from 4 to 3.9 between the 2 years. Calculate the income elasticity of demand for rice for this household. For the YAD calculation, we've got all the data, the incomes, the quantities, so we change them as percentage changes. So the answer is this one. C. Using an ADA's diagram, explain the likely effect on the Philippines' real GDP as a result of higher global energy prices. As the text explains, when there is a rise in the global energy prices, what is expected is that it will lead to higher production costs for the firms and leads to a decrease in production, causing short-run aggregate supply to decrease. Thus, the country's real GDP will fall. You can illustrate such with this diagram. D. Using an international trade diagram, explain how the government of the Philippines gains revenue by imposing a tariff on rice imports. When there is a new tariff imposed on imported rice, the tariff revenue that the Philippines government can collect would increase since every rice imported to the country now should be tariff imposed. You can find the situation in the diagram below. E. Using a demand and supply diagram, explain what is likely to happen to the consumer surplus if the minimum price charged by private bus drivers is raised further above the equilibrium price. If the government puts a legal minimum price to the bus market that is higher than the free market price, the market demand will decrease, as we understand with the law of demand, and it will result in market excess supply. Thus, the consumer surplus will decrease. You can find the changed situation for the consumer surplus. F. Using a poverty cycle diagram, explain the likely effect of official development assistance on incomes in the Philippines. When there is more ODA provided to the country, it means that more foreign money inflows to the country as a form of investment in businesses and infrastructure, or more funds being given to citizens to improve health, education, and job training. Understandably, all can contribute to break the poverty cycle and lead to higher incomes and productivity of the country. G. Using information from the text, data, and your knowledge of economics, evaluate the policies used in the Philippines to reduce poverty and income inequality. As I said earlier, you can smoothly start the essay by putting some general introduction of the country's economic data or issue, and defining a few key terms such as poverty, inequality, and relevant government policies that are used in the country would work to finish the introduction. For this question specific, as there are multiple government policies mentioned in the given text, your discussion should focus on evaluating each policy's pros and cons. Obviously, you have no time and need to evaluate all the policies mentioned, so do keep in mind that the following is for the revision reference. So for the body one way to compose and categorize the multiple policies would be according to the characteristics of them. So I first made evaluation on demand-side policies. The first policy that the Philippines government enacted and I would like to evaluate is the policy that granted subsidies for farmers and also to the private bus drivers. This is one of the demand-side policies. As you can check the following ideas, you evaluate its pros and cons. Next, you evaluate the policy that put more spending on the public healthcare system, which is financed by indirect taxes on tobacco. Just like the first policy, you put some evaluation mentioning some pros and cons of this policy. Thirdly, there is a policy that increased the conditional cash payment. Do not forget to evaluate its pros and cons with references. Last demand-side policy to be evaluated is the policy that government increased its spending as a form of expansionary fiscal policies. You can finish your body one with its own pros and cons. Next, in body two, evaluation would focus on the supply side policies that the Philippines government conducts. First is the policy that removed quota on pork imports and other free trade measures due to the joining of ASEAN. You can check its pros and cons. And next is the policy that imposed tariffs on rice imports, which seems to be the counteracting measure from the policy above. Third is the policy that encouraging workers to shift from agriculture, fishing, and informal sector to the other growing sectors. Next is the policy that increased the spending on infrastructure and its pros and cons. Last is the policy that increased use of grants and loans received through ODA. And its pros and cons. And as always, I reckon conclusion is not necessary, but if you have remaining time, do write a few words to summarize your evaluation.